guests in this conversation. I will start our discussion this afternoon by making a couple of opening remarks. I would say that 3 weeks into this war, and Russia seems to be on the brink of default, a huge wave of refugees exiting Ukraine, companies and people fleeing Russia, and a sequence of sanctions that isolates and could potentially be extremely damaging to the Russian economy. In the same time, the West faces significant challenges ahead and as well. Post-pandemic national resilience recovery plans have not even started in many countries, so recovery from pandemic has not even been on the way significantly. Inflation in the Eurozone and in the US is rampant, and mainly driven by energy prices. Shortages in grain, precious metals and steel are driving prices to the roof and stalling entire economic sectors like construction, and the erosion of the income of the people is driving down consumption as well everywhere. Moreover, the disruptions in supply chain globally seem to be, if you read all the many articles that we see today, the single most significant nightmare of the majority of the CEOs seems to be the significant disruptions in the global chain logistics, and something that has never been witnessed nor seen, and it's only inflamed post-pandemic by the current situation. And so if we wrap in a nutshell, it seems like there's a lot of bad news from all angles, much more than we can normally handle in a time of an economic or financial crisis. 2019 seems to be, for many of us, a dream far, far away, because almost everything that we said back then will never be possible again in a globalized world or in a cyber world is now possible, and we see it unfolding in front of our eyes. That is traditional war, that is significant spikes in energy prices, that is significant inflation and erosion of consumer, of people income. So everything we thought in 2019 this world is going to avoid in the future is coming back with a strong force. My name is Alexandra Gătej. I'm a member of the Scientific Council of New Strategy Center in Romania. I'm an economist by formation. One of my previous jobs has been presidential advisor on economy to the president of Romania. And today's event is a discussion about sanctions, but not only, their effects on the world in general, because economy is not black and white. And since everything is linked in the world, the situation is much more complex than just coming out with headlines or with simplistic assessments. I'm joined in the conversation today by two very distinguished economists themselves, Dr. Antonia Colibășanu. Antonia is a senior geopolitical analyst focusing on strategic competitive intelligence analysis. She is Geopolitical Futures Chief Operating Officer, a very well-known figure in Romania with an extensive bio, which we have already seen in the invitation of this event. And also I have the pleasure to introduce and to announce the presence in our panel of Dr. Andrei Illarionov, a Russian economist himself, now a senior fellow, Center for Security Policy in Washington. Thank you, Dr. Illarionov. Thank you, Antonia, for being present here. The way we are going to structure this panel is that I will invite each of the panelists, Antonia, Dr. Illarionov, to address the audience for, say, 15 minutes each, and then we will take a significant period of time, that is almost an hour, we have at our disposal to answer the questions that are going to come no doubtly our way. You already have a battery of 11 questions prepared that have been coming since the invitation of this event. So without further ado, thank you, Dr. Colibășanu and Dr. Illarionov, for your presence in this panel. The floor is yours. I will invite Antonia to start with her remarks first. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all, and thank you, Dr. Illarionov, for joining us today. It will be a pleasure to also hear your perspective on what is going on now in the world economy and in Russia. I have prepared several points to begin with. And because I'm an economist by background, but I'm also doing geopolitical analysis, I'm going to focus on the trends, the major trends that I am seeing currently affecting the world economy, and less on the sanctions effects within the Russian economy. So I will begin by saying that this is a first. What we are seeing currently is a first, a never before seen event where we have sanctions dealing with a major economy of the world, the economy of Russia. And I will also say that while we are in an economic warfare, this warfare began way before we have had sanctions. The moment that the economic warfare began was the moment that Russia decided to invade Ukraine and the moment that we couldn't send ships to Ukrainian ports. We now know that this is a major disruptive element of the global supply chains. I was reading today that we are seeing everywhere in the insurance world a major effect of the Black Sea basically becoming from a peaceful sea turning into a very dangerous sea. And the insurance world is basically starting to take effect of that and endorsing the Black Sea shipping as a war premium with war premiums because of the things that are happening currently in the Black Sea. Not to mention that there are about 100 ships currently in the ports of the Ukrainian territory or around the ports of Ukraine, which are basically blocked and are basically at risk of war. We do not know how we will basically go back to what it was before, which is a Black Sea that is fully navigable. And this is the first element that has started the economic warfare. Now, what we clearly see from the sanctions and the decoupling of Russia from the SWIFT system, 70% of its banking sector being decoupled fully from the SWIFT system, we are seeing uncertainty. So all CEOs in the world are renegotiating contracts, are thinking about reputational risk when it comes to doing business with Russia. And because of this, we are seeing an increase in operational costs, which is, again, something that we have never seen before because there are multiple layers where everything is being reconsidered and rechecked. From the loads coming into Europe from Russia being checked at the level of each cargo being checked in the port of Rotterdam and not only. From ships being turned back. And we are only talking about ships that have been on contract before February 24th, which is very important. We do not have news on what's happening in the shipping industry since the war began. And what we are hearing is that we have a complete stagnation on that part, or a delay. So it's basically stagnation and delay are the core and the keywords that we keep hearing from the shipping industry. Now, moving forward onto something that we hear a lot about in the media, energy. Energy is the key commodity that has come up before the war began and now is coming up more often as we are seeing an increase in price of energy. And obviously, we are thinking about what if Russia decides to retaliate and cut the energy flows into Europe because of the sanctions that we have imposed on Russia. Basically, what we are seeing in the never-before spectrum of things, we are seeing a high-level uncertainty of how we can keep our industry going for the next months, years, or whatnot. And we are seeing in face of having to recalibrate, having to go for alternative sources, having to talk to other partners, and having to form new alliances. So at the geopolitical level, we are seeing negotiations around the energy topic that are basically going into the setting of new alliances coming up. Now, for the business sector, this is a restructuring over another restructuring that was expected to come because of the pandemic. So let's not forget that we've ended the year 2021 with the hope that there will be no pandemic, but knowing that we will have to restructure our economy. And now we have in our face a never before event, which is basically forcing us to restructure more and to readapt to something that we don't quite know how to calculate. We don't know how to calculate the risk. So these are the short-term effects. The longer-term effects of the energy prices, of the commodity prices coming together with the uncertainty on the market is basically going to be seen on two major sectors. And one of them is the food sector, agriculture, relating to the food supply chain. Let's not forget that Ukraine and Russia both are major producers of cereals, of grains of all kinds. They're also basically the grain basket, the wheat basket of the world in a sense, if we take the two together. So that is one key aspect of the agricultural sector. The other one is fertilizers. Because of the energy prices going up, we basically have pressure on the fertilizers prices to go up and affecting the price of food. Now, the other large sector that is affected by all this is the commodity sector, commodities, metals, metallurgical industries sector, which is basically tied into the uncertainty. So we see commodity prices going up because of this uncertainty in the businesses that we're dealing with trade in commodities, expecting, what comes next, and not knowing what comes next has driven caution and has driven a higher price in copper, aluminum, nickel, you name it, which is going to put pressure on anything that we kind of use those commodities into, which is from automobiles to, I don't know, the coffee machine. I basically say that the two key elements for normal lifestyle, as we know it now, modern lifestyle, are aluminum and copper being key, because copper is being used in all kinds of cables, and basically you cannot have light without copper. You cannot have an engine without copper. And we are seeing the copper price fluctuating, which kind of tells us exactly the degree of restructuring that we will need to take after these short-term effects of the current crisis. While we are seeing aluminum and nickel going up and up and up on a growing trend, which basically tells us that everything is going to become more expensive because we don't know what we are dealing with. Now, to come to a conclusion, not only that we are seeing these prices up, but we are also seeing a shaping up, a restructuring of the current supply chain when it comes to steel makers and when it comes to all kinds of industries coming and basically founding on the steel makers in at large. I'm not going to go into all elements of this, but think about, China is a major steel producer. China is also tying into the European automobile sector, is also tying into the American market very much. So we live in an interconnected world. And the way that the flows are going to restructure, pushed by the uncertainty that we are seeing, but also by the new alliances that we are seeing being formed, is going to define the world that we are going to live in after the war takes place, after the war is ended, hopefully soon. It all depends on the timing that this all takes. So we have a few scenarios that we are working with in geoeconomics currently. The first one is the overly optimistic one. The war is coming to an end tomorrow, which is, very soon we will get over this. And we will find a way to negotiate back with Russia. And this is, I believe, that is kind of the hope of everyone in the West, because we need Russia in economics. We need to have Russia as a partner, after all. We never expected this to happen. So we would like the war to take an end and basically come back to negotiating. This, however, if it doesn't happen, and if this comes into the second quarter of this year as a full war and comes into the next 6 months, and it will affect production in agriculture and industry, we are likely going to face recession, and we are likely going to face stagflation at a global level, which is kind of scary because that means inflation coupled with high unemployment rates. If this triggers on, and this is the very pessimistic scenario that we are working with currently, if this triggers on and if this leads to a world where regional powers are coming up and realign themselves, we are likely going to see some countries, those that are used as proxies by Russia currently, Belarus being a very obvious one, maybe Kazakhstan, going into a sort of a semi-isolation, which will trigger a new kind of polarization in the world economy, and other countries realigning for different layers of cooperation with both Russia and the West on different degrees. We are yet to see how China is going to shape its strategy towards Russia, but it is likely that China is going to stand by US more than with Russia, considering its level of dependency. We are also looking forward to see South Africa, Brazil, and India's position on what Russia is doing now. And depending on those, we are going to see a different kind of structure if it all goes to a full renegotiation of where we stand today. And with this, I hope I didn't take too much time, but I am fully open to take more questions, and I could probably lecture on this for 1 hour and never stop because it's all in my head. So sorry for taking too long.
No, in fact, Dr. Colibășanu, thank you so much. This is spot on. If I look at our watch here, we are exactly where we should be. So thank you very much for making this first round of assessment over, let me say, the rest of the world, in the sense that if I understand correctly, we also need to realize that the world economy, I mean the Western world economy, is coming out of a pandemic with its issues existing. So there is a pre-existing condition, to borrow a medical term, in which the Western world has already being into. To this pre-existing condition of crisis, we add a new layer, and that is the uncertainty of the war. So in reality, the war is aggravating a pre-existing condition. And I think for listening to you, this is what, if I would to sum up, this is what I gather for myself. Thank you. It is now time to turn to our next panelist, Dr. Andrei Illarionov. And before handing the floor to you, Dr. Illarionov, obviously we talked, Dr. Colibășanu talked about the implications on Western economies, and all the eyes of the panel and the viewers are now turning to you to understand from you a little bit more on what does it mean for Russia economy. This is an economic discussion, but economy is many things in all. Obviously, one of the reasons why people will look to you attentively is also because you had the opportunity to work as a presidential advisor on economic policies for President Vladimir Putin. And this is one of the reasons why we really believe at New Strategy Center that the combination that we created today in this panel is going to be very valuable for our viewers. Without further ado, Dr. Illarionov, we would like to hear your statements. Thank you.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Alexandra, for inviting me, and thank you very much, Antonia, for covering very wide range of issue with very impressive coverage. In my position, I would probably just to try to add something to what already has been said, and with more focus on Russia, as Alexandra suggested, but also trying to cover other parts of this huge topic as well. So first of all, we need to understand that we are living in the world where we have number of actors that are making decisions that we can follow and we see impact on. So on one hand, this is the Western countries, European countries, United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, some other countries that are taking sanctions against Russia and Belarus. On the other hand, we have Russia and Belarus taking their actions as a so-called response to this, as Antonia said, economic warfare, as they consider, they have pronounced economic warfare against Russia and Belarus. So that is why it's economic warfare from both sides, not from just one side. And frankly speaking, we looked into the origin of this economic warfare, we will find not two sides, but only one side, and actually just one person, Vladimir Putin. So just essentially, even the number of sanctions have been imposed by Western countries. The origin of those sanctions and the origin of economic warfare is aggressive actions of Mr. Putin. So that is why we are dealing with a rather unique case when just one person, even at the top of leadership of one, not the last country in the world, has created enormous crisis in many aspects of our life. Certainly, first of all, for Russia and Belarus, for neighboring countries, and for the world economy. Some of those issues have been touched by Antonia already. Let me go more on specific impacts and specific issues concerning this economic warfare. Actually, I like this term that Antonia was using. I think it's much better than just to talk about sanctions. It's just really economic warfare that is includes a number of actions, a number of consequences. So first of all, let me go through the types of sanctions that have been applied by Western countries against Russia and Belarus. Also, just probably it's necessary to say that some of them were quite unexpected for Putin and for the Russian leadership. Some of them, yes, they have been discussed for many years. For example, SWIFT limitations, but almost nobody was discussing the possibility of introducing the freezing assets of the central bank of Russia. Mr. Putin himself was very proud that Central Bank of Russia was accumulating foreign exchange reserves for many years, actually for more than 20 years. And just before the last stage in this war against Ukraine, it's not a new war, it's continuation of war, at least from year 2014. The total amount of Russian foreign exchange reserves stood at 642 billion US dollars. Was pretty impressive amount, and even with restructuring of this reserve, because some Russian central bank was increasing the share of gold in the total amount of reserves, at least from year 2006. You can see very clearly these policies. So it means that the principal decision of Mr. Putin and economic team around Mr. Putin to prepare this war, we can indicate very clearly from economic point of view, it is year 2006. So it means for at least 16 years, Mr. Putin and the Russian central bank too, so it was not only Putin alone, they were preparing for this economic warfare against Ukraine, against neighbors, and against the rest of the world. So that's first kind of decisions that have been taken, and also relocating substantial portion of foreign exchange reserves from US dollars and euros into yuan. That also can be detected from year 2006, year 2007. So that is why they were making some steps in preparation of possible sanctions, but nobody in the leadership of Russia expected that the response would be such devastating as it happened right now. Out of these 642 billion US dollars, according to latest estimates, at least 415 billion US dollars have been frozen. The Russian central bank stopped to publish the real amount of reserves, and for the last 3 weeks they published the same amount, 642, even providing some explanation that it's not real amount because it's kind of legal or some kind of quasi-legal reserves, but they cannot use those reserves. How much foreign exchange reserves remains at the disposal of the Russian central bank remains unknown, because almost immediately central bank introduced and changed almost on a daily basis regulations and limitations for foreign exchange operations and for amount of withdrawal of hard currency, both by individuals and by companies, by private by business. Initially, it was 10,000 US dollars per just one withdrawal. As it has been revealed yesterday, now it is 5 US dollars for private entity, at least for transportation company. So which means unbelievable cutting off from foreign exchange market. Essentially, foreign exchange market ceased to exist. It is there is some numbers that have been published by central bank, but essentially there is no access to foreign exchange, not from the private person, not from private companies. So by this regard, Russia turned out to be in the Soviet-land economy with total isolation from the foreign exchange, even probably more serious isolation that it was in the late Soviet economy, when there was some foreign exchange, but it was rationed by the central planned authorities. Looking at this number, 5,000 US dollars for 6 months, it has been revealed yesterday at the economic meeting with Mr. Putin in Kremlin. So if it is so, it means unbelievable cutting off and isolating Russia from foreign exchange that probably we haven't seen even in the late Soviet Union. So another one which I would like to make. This is probably the most important type of sanctions that have been applied by the Western countries. The second one would be not even sanctions that have been applied not by governments, and that's very interesting. This is a so-called sanction or economic warfare, as it has been suggested by Antonia, by private business. What we can see over the last 3 weeks, it's an exodus of private business from Russia. You've probably seen this list of hundreds of foreign companies that were building their presence in Russia, investing heavily over the last 3 decades, and building quite a substantial chunk of the current Russian economy. Many of them, most of them, already either left Russian business or announced that they are leaving. So we have not seen such a massive exodus from any other country. Certainly, we haven't seen in Russia, but probably in some other countries as well, because all other countries that have been under sanctions, under Western sanctions, did not enjoy such a massive inflow of foreign capital and did not see such a active foreign participation in their economies prior to introduction of those sanctions. Next sanctions that happen to be also in the center of attention. It's cutting off transportation links with Russia by both governments and private business. Now we can see that many airports, seaports decline to accept ships or planes under Russian flag, under Belarusian flag, both on these kind of due to decisions of governments or just the private decisions of different companies. Next one is already been mentioned, this isolation of substantial chunk of the Russian banking system through SWIFT from international banking operations. So it affects not only Russian government or Belarusian government, but Russian citizens and Belarusian citizens, Russian population, Russian business that is being operating within Russia. We have not seen such a massive actions to isolate Russia. Second chapter in this discussion is impact that we can see already. Certainly, it is too early to make any overwhelming assessment and especially forecast of that type of economic warfare on Russia, but at least some numbers already became known. So exchange rate market essentially ceased to exist. It's impossible to buy for hard currency, and it is actually unknown what is the real foreign, what is the exchange rate of Russian ruble towards US dollar or euro. Certainly, central bank is publishing some numbers, but you cannot buy. Nobody can buy US dollars in Russia or euro in Russia at such rate. So that is why it is irrelevant to reality. Second, stock market in Russia ceased to exist. In the first day after introduction of sanctions or after the beginning of economic warfare, some of the Russian companies, stocks of Russian companies were traded at 98% discount just in the first day. After that, operations have been stopped and they have not been resumed. So that is why essentially stock market, Russian stock market has been killed. Because if they would resume, it means the whole Russian economy that can be purchased by, let's say, 2% of the value just before this latest stage of the war, which is unbelievable ratio between the price and the value. So so all of that naturally led to decline in economic activity. Certainly, we are at very early stage of this economic warfare, so we cannot provide any reasonable numbers just to see what would be the decline in economic activities by the end of the year. But the first estimates indicate that it would be at least 18% decline. That's already for the first even less than 3 weeks of this economic fair. So it means that the Russian economy, by the volume of GDP, would return back to the level of year 2006, before the crisis of year 2008. But it will be, even in this case, probably it's not the last word yet, so probably it might continue further, but at least the latest estimate suggests it's 18% decline this year. But it is in terms of volume, in terms of output, but in terms of isolation from international market and international economic relations, it is probably Russian economy will soon be in the situation of the Soviet economy before 1987, before the process of liberalization of the Soviet central planned economy initiated by Mikhail Gorbachev 35 years ago. Just to have in mind the possibly expected state of the Russian economy. Inflation. The central bank privately shared its forecast that inflation might be jumped to 70% this year already. Food availability. This is a problem not only for the world economy, like with grain, wheat, some other grains, but some other cereals, but also there is a problem with food availability in Russia. Some shelves of the Russian shops have been shown as completely empty, as it was in the Soviet planned economy. It is rather unexpected to see empty shelves in the so-called market economy, but this is a fact of life that we can see right now. Also, it's a very substantial impact on travel abroad, since almost all park of planes stop to perform their duties to the west. They are flying only to China, to the Middle East, and to some other countries. So the main bulk of the communication of Russia and Belarus with the Western world, both to Europe and to, let's say, United States, North America, and Japan, cease to exist. What kind of effect those economic affairs already has on the Russian economy, and what might be expected in future? Initially, it was a general, essentially consensus that whatever economic sanctions might be, their effect would be in the very best mid-term or long-term. Nobody expected short-term impact of economic sanctions on the Russian economy. But I would say that 3 weeks, it is rather short-term. It's not a medium-term. And it is already felt by businesses, by regular people, and what is probably most important, by the Russian leadership itself. Yesterday, Mr. Putin had a special meeting on the social economic situation in the country, and I can confess that this is probably the first time ever I saw him in such a psychological state as he was before. You need to understand that Mr. Putin's attitudes towards any economic problems country had before for 22 years, or more than actually for 23 years, since he started in on December 31st, 1999. Regardless what kind of serious problems were, what kind of economic crisis, whatever problems, his position always was very optimistic. He was always able to cherry pick some kind of the rosy part of the picture, the best part of the picture, and say, okay, we have little problems, but we will overcome them. It's not so important. It's not our responsibility. It sounds like everything is fine. I never saw him in such a desperation and in state of despair. I cannot recall when he would recognize the problems with rising inflation. Always he was saying, okay, inflation is going down. If not, it's going down now. Okay, it will be tomorrow, or in the worst case, day after tomorrow. It is the first time he said, okay, there is inflation and inflation will be rising. Same story with unemployment. He said, okay, unemployment is rising and will be rising. Once again, it's not so-called hard data, it is soft data, but it's soft data from Mr. Putin, which is unbelievable recognition on his side, the graveness of the current situation. So from that discussion, became clear that the only instrument the Russian leadership found to deal with this economic warfare and economic crisis is only one: massive budget financing of business that stays in Russia, which can be supported only by central bank emission. So that is why what we shall see almost definitely substantial increase in money supply in the coming months, and as a result, substantial increase in inflation. So that is why the forecast that has been privately shared by central bank, about 70%, probably only the first estimate of inflation this year. It might be this number might be reconsidered. Another very important piece of information from the yesterday's meeting is Putin's assessment of the length of this crisis. Certainly, once again, it's just only beginning. It's the very beginning. But he said clearly that the situation will not be easy, at least for 6 months. And such a recognition on the Putin side would give us some kind of basis for thinking that Putin himself and the Russian leadership are prepared for much longer disruptions, both domestically in Russia, for immediate neighbors of Russia, like for neighbors in the Black Sea Basin, and for the world. So, probably the last point that I would need to say, one of the very important impact of this economic warfare is exodus not only of private business, but just people from Russia. We all know that probably about 1 million people left Ukraine as refugees, and some of them went to Romania, totally to some other countries, but Romania was, thanks for decision of Romanian authorities and Romanian people that they're accepting refugees from Ukraine. But there is an exodus of people from Russia, especially those people with education, with entrepreneurial skills, and especially of young male who might be conscripted to the army. This is a massive exodus of young male between 18 years and 40 years old to into different directions. So it's another some kind of feature or measurement of this economic warfare. To sum up, I would say that this is definitely the crisis and the deepest crisis for Russia and Belarus first. Second, it's a substantial crisis for neighbors of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. We're not talking about Ukraine right now because it's a separate topic. But this is also, it's a crisis for the world economy. It's clear that this crisis will not be ended tomorrow or day after tomorrow. It will stay with us for reasonably long period of time. This is definitely, it's midterm crisis. It could continue for a number of years, at least, because even when the hostilities on the military field will be finished, nobody's expected that most of sanctions or substantial chunks of sanctions against Russia and Belarus will be lifted soon. So that is why we are forced to live in this new reality, at least for some time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Illarionov. Most informative and also very well structured. I think we all took a lot of notes, and I personally appreciate the very pragmatic view you're taking in assessing not only the impact it has on Russia and the many first-time things that happen, but also the impact on Western Europe. And on Europe in general. I think I absolutely agree with you that this is a crisis here to stay, and it's an added crisis to what we had already so far in the pandemic. I'm extremely interested in your assessment of not easy for the next 6 months, and also I think maybe Western Europe has not taken the words literally of Vladimir Putin when he says the things are going in their course. I think he refers to the military operations, and we should also take some of it into account, because if he speaks about 6 months, it means nobody's expecting this to finish tomorrow or in a week. In other words, I'm saying we shouldn't be too optimistic. It's very interesting what you say about the neighboring countries in the basin of the Black Sea, and also in Europe, and probably this is the long goal, not necessarily just Ukraine, but to change the equilibrium of security in Europe. With this in mind, I would like to start, if you don't mind. There are a lot of questions coming our way. I'm going to start, and there are questions addressed directly, and then are also questions for both of you. I would just immediately run into the questions that came during. So we have questions that came when the invitation was launched, and some of them you addressed. So I'm going to try and filter those. And there are also questions that came during your interventions. So I'm going to start with one of them. Which is a question addressed to both of you. In addition, the question goes like that. In addition to the China-Russia relationship, when do our guests think Vladimir Putin may turn into a real liability for China, for the leader of China, for Xi Jinping? So that is one question. It's for both of you. So. Antonia, would you like to have a shoot at this one first?
Well, after hearing Mr. Illarionov, I think that he just turned into a liability for China, because if we think it's basically on two folds. First, strategically, China needs to make sure that its most important client stays to be a client, at least, if not the most important client, and that is the US. So China is in a difficult position when talking to Russia today, because it needs to take into account the US and its dependency on the US market. So that is the strategic layer. Now, the tactical layer, when it comes to the financial services and to energy. First, energy, China cannot really become overnight a customer of Russian energy just because of the impossibility for that to happen in a technical manner. The geography is not very good for new projects to be implemented fast. We know Russia has built a pipeline to China, but that is not really replacing or even come close to what Russia is supplying Europe. So that is not something that is doable right now. Not to mention the technicalities of standards of what kind of energy, which kind of type of oil, and so on, which are also very important when we are talking business, and we know it. Then financial links. Okay, we all talk that China can become an alternative for Russia when it comes to SWIFT, but CHIPS, which is the system that China has built in order to support the yuan becoming the reserve currency, is built on SWIFT. So for international payments, CHIPS is actually using the SWIFT network. It's not different. Obviously, bilateral trade, bilateral investment, bilateral relationships between China and Russia will be doable. But what we have seen in the last 3 weeks is the fact that Chinese state banks are refusing letter of credit to Chinese companies willing to go forward with their Russian partners. And that's in commodities market. That is one of the reasons that coal price has become so high. So it's also an internal pressure there that the Chinese leadership needs to take into account at the tactical level, even when businesses are saying, well, wait a minute, I really want to preserve my right to do business and to continue doing business well with my best customers, with the Western world, while also I want to kind of see how I can manage this relationship, but let's wait for a while. Now, with the 6 months mentioned here, I think we're in a second scenario where we are talking about semi-isolation, and we are talking about Mr. Putin being a liability already for China, or a difficult subject to touch. So that's my impression. I talk too much, so.
No, don't worry. Thank you. Dr. Illarionov, what is your answer to this?
I think my answer would be very close to what Antonia has said just right now. For China, it's definitely a strategic partner, a strategic, very competitive partner is the United States, not Russia. And Chinese leadership not once said it, not only before this latest stage of aggression of Putin against Ukraine and the rest of the world, but even after that. And the recent statements from the Chinese officials are very clear. So they are trying to distance themselves from Putin and from this aggression. And it is based on the character of relations between two countries, and especially between two leaders. This is a very strong sign that Chinese leadership is not happy with Mr. Putin. And even if China would provide some support, financial support, or support in economic terms, or even in military terms to Mr. Putin, in some cases, in some amounts, that support cannot be wholehearted, and it could not be of such size that Mr. Putin hoped for. So that means that even these expectations of the relations between Russia and China might be even worse for Putin than he expected. Certainly, he expected that it would be so-called brotherly or relations or relations of allies. No, they are not. And Chinese did demonstrate that their relations, their attitudes toward Putin and towards Russia right now is much frostier than Putin expected. So that is why we are going to see something that we did not expect. We did not expect probably such a response from some Western nations, such a united and, in some sense, very radical response towards Putin's aggression. But and Putin, to some extent, expected, not expected. For example, he did not expect freezing the assets of the central bank. But definitely, what Putin did not expect, such a frosty response from China. And this is probably the most painful invention or some kind of for him in the last 3 weeks. So probably I would mention here one general point for coming future. Russia right now is forced to adjust itself to a new life. We were talking about this new reality, to a new life, Russia without world, Russia being isolated. Not fully, we understand it. It's not fully even with the Western countries, even less with China, India, or some other Middle Eastern countries, but it's much more isolated than ever before over the last 3 decades. But another point, the world should adjust its life, to be prepared to live without Russia. Even many of us, and Antonia was referring to that Russia is producer of very important products and supply of energy and supply of cereals and supply of metals and supply of many other stuff. But the world might find itself in a position, at least for some foreseeable future, to try to live without Russia or without substantial flow of products and services from Russia.
That is quite a scenario. Thank you. I need to make a real selection because the questions are really pouring in. I'm going to try and alternate the questions, and therefore the next one is still for you, Dr. Illarionov. There's a question saying like that. You have worked with the President Vladimir Putin personally, and the question here is, how will he react when it will become obvious that his military goals cannot be fulfilled in the timing or in the sequence in which he wanted them to be fulfilled? Will he try to achieve victory through a military solution, regardless of the cost in human lives and large-scale destruction? Will he rain a rubble? Or how will he be able to justify to the internal population, to the Russian people?
It happened that several days ago I written a special text exactly trying to answer this question. And my written response is as follows. Putin has 3 basic options, because it's clearly that he was not able to achieve military victory as he expected within the first 2 days, according to his blitzkrieg plans in Ukraine. He was not able to achieve those goals within 5 days, as he reissued his orders to his military to finish with Ukraine and with capture of Kiev. He failed. He failed to do it within 2 weeks. It was the kind of the basic plan. He failed to do it within 3 weeks. Moreover, he will not be able to achieve it. It is absolutely clear right now that even if he will be able to achieve his military goals, those military goals will never be translated into political victory because of the state of Ukraine right now, because of complete absence of any pro-Russian politician in Ukraine. The very first result of Putin's aggression against Ukraine is complete elimination of pro-Russian politicians. Even those people who 4 weeks ago, 1 month ago, were arguing in support of Putin or in support of some kind of policies and decisions coming from Kremlin, all of them evaporated, and some of them even publicly proclaimed that they are on the side of Ukraine and are ready to fight Putin, both with weapons in their hands, which is a remarkable turn of events, which not very many people expected, especially in Ukraine and in Russia. And at this moment, there is no any person of Ukrainian citizenship who would support Putin's action in Ukraine. It is such a drastic difference with year 2014, when we saw tens or hundreds of Ukrainian politicians or leaders who would assign themselves with Putin or with pro-Russian policies. Today's none. So that is why politically Putin got probably the most devastating defeat already. So that is why his potential military victory would not change this calculus and would not change the situation on the ground. But the most important fact looks like that Mr. Putin cannot achieve even military victory. We know that now the number of Ukrainian military is going to be on equal with the Russian aggression forces, or maybe even more. And based on the activities of Ukrainian military, it is quite clear that Ukrainian military is doing much more effectively than the Russian ones. And the ratio of losses, at least confirmed losses, now is 5-1 in favor of Ukraine. So, which is something that none among military experts expected. So, with such results and with unbelievably high mood in Ukraine, last week, for the first time in the history of independent Ukraine, sociological polls registered that absolute majority of Ukrainians, more than any time, supported Ukrainian president, supported Ukrainian military, 98% support to Ukrainian military, 92% support to President Zelensky, and the highest ever number of Ukrainians think that country is moving in right direction. It's rather hard to even to comprehend. Country is under attack. Country is under shelling, under bombing. Some part of the territory of Ukraine is being occupied by aggressor. People are being killed by thousands. An absolute majority of Ukrainians, higher than ever, saying country is moving in right direction, probably referring not to actions of aggressor, but to actions of Ukrainian military and Ukrainian political leadership. So in this situation, Mr. Putin has a zero probability to have political victory, but probably even military victory, looking what is going on the in the Ukraine right now. So what kind of options he has now? Three basic options.
In fact, if I may, I feel this is a moment that we link to one of the next questions is, if you may hold on for a second, Dr. Illarionov, to continue your idea. So consider this scenario. By late April, Ukraine and Russia agree on ceasefire and partial withdrawal of Russian troops. Contours of the settlements shape up. Ukraine's neutrality with guarantees. Donbas gets autonomous status. with international guarantees, possibly a land bridge to Crimea to secure water supplies. Sanctions are partially lifted. What will happen in Russia economically, and what will be Putin's next move? To your last sentence. So, what are the scenarios?
With your last comments, you aggravated my situation because it's just correct.
You're not getting off easily.
Okay. Let me just to try to finish this previous part, because from my point of view, Mr. Putin had three basic options, and he has three basic options right now, because it became clear for everybody, including for himself, that he cannot achieve political goals that he proclaimed. He almost certain that he cannot get his military goals. What he could do now, three options. First, to withdraw Russian troops right now, the sooner the better, and to say, okay, to make and to pretend that in reality all those goals are fulfilled, and proclaim, okay, Russian troops destroyed military infrastructure of Ukraine. They finished demilitarization of Ukraine. We are victors. We are great, and something like that. Certainly, it would be rather painful to explain to the Russian population, to the entourage of Mr. Putin, but okay, that would be the smartest move for Mr. Putin. Because in this case, Mr. Putin would be able to save his political regime and his position within Russia. Second option is to try to negotiate with Ukrainian authorities some kind of a new arrangement. Let me call it Minsk III, which means just to try to apply some conditions on Ukrainian leadership. Okay, neutrality status, or some kind of limitations for military development, or station of Russian troops on new Ukrainian territories, in addition to Crimea and in addition to Donbass, and trying to some kind of to secure some territorial gains that he was able to make within the first 3 weeks. My forecast would be the resolute no from Ukrainian side. No Ukrainian leader, Mr. Zelensky himself, is able to say yes to such a situation. If somebody would say something so, or I would trying to move to that direction, that person will be removed by the Ukrainian people. It is politically impossible for the Ukrainian society to accept such a decision. So that is why it means the war will continue from the Ukrainian side. Nobody on the Ukrainian side is going to give up, is going to surrender, and going to have another Minsk in any form. So, moreover, Zelensky himself proclaimed not once that his position is total withdrawal of Russian troops from territory of Ukraine. Having said so publicly, not once, he cut ways back for himself. He cannot accept any compromise in these particular issues. So that is why the worst case for Ukraine and for Zelensky would be acceptance, at least de facto, not de jure, Crimea belonging to Russia, and Donbass is temporarily under control of separatists. But even that potential decision is unattainable for Ukrainian society right now. And it would mean if somebody, including Zelensky, with his incredible level of support, would try to do that, it will be the last day for him in his office. So that is why having such a response from the Ukrainian authorities, Mr. Putin would be left with the last third option: to continue war, to bring more reserves from Russia, from Abkhazia, from Armenia, from Tajikistan, mercenaries from Syria, from Libya. His attempt to get someone from Northern Korea, which is a shocking fact that Mr. Putin was asking North Korea to provide military support, not only China, but North Korea. So trying to mobilize some additional resources to bring them to Ukraine to continue the war. Certainly he could do something, and actually we saw over last week that he's bringing new reinforcement to Ukraine. The fate of this reinforcement will be the same as the initial expeditionary force. They will be defeated over there. It will take longer, but will be defeated. They will be defeated. And now, very important point. Putin is bringing all military that is able to fight to Ukraine. And all of those troops will be destroyed in Ukraine. Certainly, it could take longer than any one of us would expect, but they will be destroyed and defeated. And it means that within a reasonable period of time, we don't know how long, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, main bulk of Russian military will be defeated and destroyed in Ukraine by Ukrainians with support of allies and friends in Ukraine. And after that, Mr. Putin would lose the backbone of his political regime in Russia, Russian military. And that situation would create unbelievable situation for Putin himself, because his military, his National Guard, his Kadyrovtsi groups and so on, they will be destroyed either partially or fully in Ukraine, and he would lose the basis for his political regime. If that third option will be taken by Putin, it will be accelerated finish of his political regime in Russia. I would stop here.
At this point in time, I would also like to add to you the question of the nuclear threat.
I think it's bluff. It is a very cynical and calculated bluff. Putin, in the worst case, can use nuclear weapon to be detonated somewhere over Atlantic Ocean, not over Ukraine, not over European country, but somewhere where there is no population, just to demonstrate that he's so aggressive that he can use nuclear weapon as a potential threat to his enemies and so on. But that's a very important. The nuclear weapon is a very particular stuff. If you can use nuclear blackmail too often, too regularly, and you always, Mr. Putin, regularly is just referring to use of nuclear weapon, the value of these nuclear weapons is going to be diminished. It's inflation of nuclear threats. For example, if you talk to Ukrainians, they were very much afraid initially that the nuclear can be used against Ukraine. Now, all Ukrainians agree it doesn't matter. Even if Putin will use nuclear against us, we will continue to fight and will continue to defeat Russian troops. Or those who will be left will continue to fight. It will not change our attitude. And this is the most radical consequences of the using of these nuclear weapon threats. Nuclear weapon threats is important when it can change the balance, which means that if one particular side can try to threaten to use nuclear weapons, it means the final decision. So just nothing can change this equation. What Putin achieved by this nuclear blackmail, that at least already the kind of substantial European country, Ukraine, does not fear anymore nuclear threat from Mr. Putin. Today it is Ukraine, tomorrow will be other countries. We understand that it is something very strange because it means that it's normalization in our psychology, in our understanding. It's normalization of use of nuclear. Since 1945, since the first use of nuclear weapons against some particular targets in Japan, nuclear weapons was considered and is considered as something that completely forbidden, that something should not happen at any cost, at any price. It's completely. What Mr. Putin did with his blackmail, now among military leadership in many countries around the world, Ukraine, United States, Brussels, NATO, it is considered as absolutely realistic possibility. And if it is so, if it is realistic possibility, so this leadership, and first of all, military leadership and the political leadership, now psychologically is becoming ready that it might happen, and that is what they need to do in the case if nuclear weapons is being used. So that is why Putin destroyed this last, the argument of last resort. And that is why in this new psychological situation, this threat is fastly losing value. That is something unexpected because we've never been in such psychological state before. Because for absolute majority of the world, the nuclear was considered to be absolutely forbidden to use. Now, the world is publicly discussing what would happen if Putin uses nuclear. So what will be response from our side? Nuclear, non-nuclear, tactical nuclear, strategic nuclear, and so on. So that is why this psychological barrier has been destroyed. And after that, the reason to use nuclear as a threat disappeared.
Thank you. But not the 6,000 heads. I have a question now for Dr. Colibășanu. Since the Antonia, are you? I cannot see you. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Since the invasion of Crimea, the question is: Europe had the time to work on gaining energy independence. Energy supplies could be diversified through a number of options, such as the South Gas Corridor, LNG from the USA, nuclear energy, or by increasing the production of green energy. Some measures can be applied fast, others will need more time to be implemented. In how much time you think, in your opinion, can Europe achieve a reduced energy dependence on Russia, and what will this mean from Russia, and what will this mean for Russia? Will Russia focus on China and India for exporting its resources? What will be the cost of that?
Yeah, so I tackled a bit the response with regards to how Russia could actually go sell its energy to China. It's not easy. In summary, it's not easy and it will take time. Now, to respond to how fast can EU and Europe in general decrease its dependency to Russia, the most optimistic paper that I've seen from IAEA, that is the International Energy Agency that is producing such reports, I have seen the best scenario for reducing up to 30% dependency in 1 year, which pretty much tells us that it is impossible to get away from Russian energy fast. And that is only normal because obviously we're not only talking about consumers and household consumers, we're talking about consumers in the industry. And basically, we need to get the same kind of energy for industries to consume. Now, the best solution for Europe would be to have ready-made solutions for getting alternative energy sources in place, green energy, right? This is all that Europe really wanted during these years. However, we do not have that, and we don't necessarily have the money available to invest into something like that fast, considering the economic hurdles that we are facing, the pandemic, and now the war. So the most viable choice is to build infrastructure that will accommodate LNG and to invest on infrastructure and sources that we have. That is nuclear, the available alternative sources that we have to support our energy consumption, and hydro, whatnot. We have seen also coal becoming an alternative source of energy, which can be used if needed. So that is coming up in the European Union talk as an alternative for Russian energy if everything fails. But clearly, the talk during this year and the solution that everyone agrees upon is to get LNG. And LNG will actually will drive together a new set of alliances. So we already see the US turning to less friendly countries like Venezuela, for instance, to talk about how Venezuela oil and LNG could get into Europe. American LNG is the obvious source. Qatar and LNG was again the obvious source, but I think we will see more of the traditional unfriendly countries coming into the bucket of sources for Europe as this unfolds and as this crisis goes further into more than 6 months. On the long term, I would stress that I don't really see us cutting fully from Russian energy, and Russia knows this. I mean, this has been a political tool as much as an economic tool. The good news there is that Russia cannot really afford to cut its ties from Europe because if we're talking China, we are talking infrastructure problems. If we're talking India, we are talking shipping industries. And, besides the uncertainty and the self-sanctioning that we currently have in the shipping industries, we have a different kind of behavior and a different kind of standardization when it comes to Indian energy. So yes, there have been gestures, but you've seen that India basically said, okay, we want to explore the possibility of us buying energy on retail markets, which means we're not really ready to commit. Let's not forget that Russia would rather have long-term contracts and not sell on retail markets. So it's difficult. It is really difficult for Russia to move away from Europe, as much as it is for Europe to move away from Russia at this point.
Thank you. That goes back to how linked everything is and why it is not a simple situation altogether. I turn back to you, Dr. Illarionov. I'm trying to make these two questions in one. They relate more to Russia itself and to the labor market. So the labor market, as we know, is a geopolitical economic indicator and obviously offers a change into any kind of economy. We're now talking about the changes in the Russian economy. Do you think that the international warfare and the effects of this warfare will have an effect on the Russian labor market? Obviously, we're talking about unemployment, and therefore, can this result in social unrest? That is the first part of the question, and also linked to this, the second part of the question is, do you think there is a difference in the way people in the rural area of Russia feel these effects of warfare versus the people in the cities? There is talk about Russia's economic resilience that may be strengthened by people turning inwards. Do you think this can hurt the domestic stability in Russia, short, medium, long term?
All right. First of all, the development in the labor market. We already see signs of declining economic activity and rising unemployment because just really due to, first of all, withdrawal of foreign businesses from Russia, stop of investment process on the part of foreign businesses and Russian businesses in Russia because of this credit crunch within Russia. Third factor, number of business CEOs or leaders are leaving Russia like exodus. Just last week, they have registered 62% increase in flights of business jets of Russia with one-way ticket. So just leaders of business community of Russian origin, not only foreign origin, but Russian origin, are leaving Russia without any plans to return back to Russia anytime soon. So all of this would lead, and already leading, to a substantial decline in economic activity, and we cannot expect returning to normality, at least for these coming 6 months or much longer, or maybe even longer. So it would have, and also people with skills, both professional skills as well as entrepreneurial skills, are leaving Russia en masse right now, and that process, this exodus, would continue. So that is why it's at the same time substantial decline in the labor force in the country with rise of unemployment at the same time, which means the demand for labor is going down even faster. It is rather hard to say for the moment which part of the country will be affected. Probably the urban area and the industrial center will be affected much stronger than the rural areas due to the concentration of businesses in the urban cities, urban areas. But as for social unrest, I do not expect anything substantial. And the reason is because social unrest is a function not only of economic situation, but function of political situation and political regime. Actually, we do not know many examples of social unrest in the countries with hard authoritarian regimes or totalitarian regime or semi-totalitarian regime. Right now, after introduction of additional measures since aggression against Ukraine for Russian population inside, with closing essentially all opposition media or semi-opposition media or those media that pretending to be opposition, all of them closed. All signs of opposition behavior or even just independent behavior have been put down harshly by Russian police and FSB. So this is a really kind of totalitarian regime that is not reminiscent to, let's say, Brezhnev Soviet Union. It is much more close to Stalinist Soviet Union. So in the Stalinist Soviet Union, we did not see many social unrest because it's dangerous. So that is why I would not expect any serious changes in that area. And also, it's not a question that has been raised, but I would use it here. I don't think that we can see any signs or any events like a coup in the Putin's entourage. I don't see anyone there who would be able to do something like that, and the political situation does not provide any basis for such type of expectations.
In fact, that was one of the questions. Thank you. I'm having a last question here, and I'm mindful about the timing, and I'm very, very grateful already by the abundance and the value of all the answers here. My last question to you, Dr. Illarionov, will be: you mentioned do you think that there is a possibility that Russia will attract in military or non-military operation another country other than Ukraine?
To attack another country?
To attract, to spill the war apart from Ukraine.
If we look into the so-called ultimatum to the West that Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has published on December 17th in the form of two drafts treaties, one treaty with the United States and other with NATO. And if we look into the text of those two documents, and after if we listen to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials like Deputy Minister Grushko, who participated in these negotiations with the West, and Deputy Minister Rybkov also was participating in this discussion with the Western countries. If we look into the written response of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs that has been delivered to the United States on February 17th, exactly 1 week before the attack on Ukraine. And if we look into the official statements of Russian MFA on March 8th and March 9th, including from Press Secretary of Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Zakharova, all those official documents are mentioning those countries that Mr. Putin would like denatoized. I was using such a neologism. Those countries are subject of denatoization. I would mention this, I would list those countries: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. All those countries have been mentioned name by name in all those official statements. And all these documents are using the strategic goal of Putin's so-called advance on the West is the return of NATO to the so-called 1997 division line in Europe, which means, in the Mr. Putin's lexics, that NATO should finish NATO membership for all those countries that became NATO members after 1997. And the language of all those documents and the language of those statements are pretty harsh, is pretty harsh. It's not a diplomatic language, it's language of ultimatum. So since we have some experience with Mr. Putin for more than 2 decades, if he says something and if he repeats something several times, it means that it is his goal. And he's very serious. He's dead serious in achieving this goal, which means that if he would be able to achieve military victory in Ukraine, he will definitely make next steps. And actually, it will be the same part of the campaign in Ukraine if he would be able to have a from military point of view, upper hand in Ukraine. Immediate goal in the same campaign will be Transnistria and Moldova. That is by definition. So nobody will be even announce anything. It will be in the same campaign. After that, we can discuss who will be the next. Georgia, Baltic countries. But for Transnistria and Moldova, this is a given. If Mr. Putin will be able to have a military victory in Ukraine.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for the clarity of your words, and sobering as well. I mean, we must not get ahead of ourselves with the optimism of the current situation and everything that you have said, and the three scenarios you have laid out for Ukraine right now. There is no military victory in sight, and therefore no political translation of that military victory. So I think we are still in evolving phase. But it is very clear. I agree with you that everyone observing how Mr. Putin talks, every time he has said something repeatedly, people need to listen, because it means that is an objective. So with this, I would like to, I'm mindful of our timing. It's been a very, in my point of view, a very, very rich conversation, and very full of a lot of information that is valuable to the analysts, to ourselves, economists especially, that are looking into this figure. I would like to deeply thank you for your time and real involvement. I feel this was not just a classical conversation. It has been something that had value and hopefully meaning for our viewers. I would like to thank you, Dr. Colibășanu, for your time and very, very pointed interventions. I would also like to thank you, Dr. Illarionov, for taking the time and being a real help in understanding what the current situation is. And I hope to be able to speak with you in 7 months, no, not in 6, and see what we have been, some of the predictions that we've made and some of the analysis we've made, what are they then? Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.